Okay, it's going.
Okay, good luck, everybody. Rabbi Billett's announcement was very, very important. I hope everybody takes it very seriously. We lane tonight, Baruch Hashem, many of us were able to go back, not everybody yet. Certainly, we look forward to an opening in the near future, Mirz Hashem, of even more opportunities for people to daven. I'll talk about that in a moment. But we lane tonight, Baal Oscha. It tells us, Vayas Kain Aaron. Aaron did exactly what he was asked to do. And Rashi says that's a shevach for Aaron. The Torah wants to praise Aaron for doing what he was supposed to do. He was dedicated. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. Now, comes not as much of a surprise that Aaron HaKohen, one of the greatest people who ever lived, did what he was asked to do. If God told us, do something, and he really told us, as opposed to, of course, he tells us everything that we're supposed to do, we don't always listen. Most of us would probably listen if God told us something. So why is there such a praise, Vayas Kain Aaron, that Aaron did exactly what he was asked to do? So there are a number of terutzim that are given for this, but I want to just focus on two quick ones. One, some Yonason Eibeshitz. Yonason Eibeshitz says, and this happens to be connected to the Daf Yomi that we're learning right now, which is why I always like to bring in things from the Daf Yomi. It says that the Levium were 10 amma tall. They were very, very tall people. And Yonason Eibeshitz says, look what Aaron HaKohen did. The Torah said he had to step up on certain little steps to be able to light the menorah. Aaron HaKohen was very, very tall. He would actually have to bend down to light the menorah without getting up on any steps. So certainly it would have made a lot of sense that Aaron HaKohen says, I know better. I don't have to step on the steps because I can reach the menorah. So many people are saying, I have antibodies. I don't have to wear my mask. I don't have to do what social distancing is required for other people because I'm immune. So we learn from Aaron HaKohen, Vayas Kain Aaron. Aaron said, I don't have to step on the steps, but this is what I'm being asked to do right now. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me I no longer need to step on the steps, then I'll stop. But right now, God said, step on the steps. And Aaron HaKohen stepped up on the steps and then had to bend down extra. And that's what the Torah is telling us according to Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz. He went out of his way to do something which was absolutely unnecessary. And many people, hopefully, are doing things that maybe we don't really need to do. Maybe some of us are safe. Maybe some of us aren't going to be transmitting. And yet, Vayas Kain Aaron, he did what he had to do. He didn't say, I know better. Similarly, the Eshel Avrami B'Choch, Rav Ron Warman, one of the great Gedolim from the previous generations, a few hundred years ago. So he said, you know what was so great about Aaron? Who was busier than Aaron HaKohen? He was making peace between all the families. There was troubles in the family. Aaron HaKohen was there to make peace. Shalom. He was Oiv Shalom, Rodev Shalom. He was the busiest person around. He was doing pastoral work for an entire nation. And yet, he said, I'm not going to forget what I have to do as well. There are many people that are very busy right now. As Baruch Hashem, businesses are starting to reopen this week, more so. Yes, Hashem, we're going to be entering a phase 2. So people might have a tendency to say, well, all that extra stuff that I was doing when I wasn't as busy now goes by the wayside. The shiurim that I was maybe now starting to listen to, some of the chesed opportunities I was involved in, the calling to people that are alone, I'm too busy for that. Nobody was busier than Aaron HaKohen. Vayas Kain Aaron. That's the shevach the Eshel Avraham says for Aaron. As busy as he was, he didn't neglect any of the important things that he had to do. We're entering into a time that's very exciting for Klal Yisrael right now as we return more and more.
Just start 10 minutes ago.
The governor has stated that we're B'Ezus Hashem when we reach phase 2, which Nassau County is scheduled to reach phase 2 this week. There are going to be additional openings, additional businesses will be opening, and he's going to be allowing, we have to wait to right now, we're still limited officially to gatherings, religious gatherings that don't have more than 10 people. But B'Ezus Hashem, we hope to hear this week additional information that will be able to open up to larger gatherings, still not the full size of the beautiful Joseph K. Miller main shul. But maybe we'll be able to open it up to maybe a quarter of the capacity of that shul, which would allow many, many more people to attend. And B'Ezus Hashem, would allow it to be in a more comfortable fashion. That we had rain this weekend, and yet Baruch Hashem Minyan were able to go on outside. Baruch Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us the rain at the right time, the Geshem Shel Bracha, and we were able to have Minyanim even with the little bits of rain. And even at times there was a thought that maybe we'd have to cancel the Minyanim. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu was kind to us, and maybe Yitzhak Hashem is going to be even kinder to us this week to allow more and more people to go back. But the message that we have to remember is Vayas Kein Aaron. There are still a lack of clarity about what antibodies mean. But it will allow me to give a kula tonight, allow me to suggest something that many people have been asking me about for months now. When can maybe the grandparents begin to get a little bit closer to the children? When can maybe one couple mix with another couple? If the kids are spending less time in school coming up in the upcoming weeks. What about camps? What about mixing of families on the block or with other children? So maybe with some of the Baruch Hashem continuing good news that we have, maybe we can start to see a little bit more of an opening up based upon the good news that we have. And let's reiterate that. Baruch Hashem, the hospitals have not been seeing, despite all the potential reasons why we could. We're already a week beyond almost Memorial Day weekend, and we haven't seen any uptick from that. It's still too early to guarantee that there won't be any uptick from all of the gatherings, beaches, and things like that the secular world goes to. And even people in our communities where we have, maybe more gatherings than we've had in the past. Obviously, with all the protests going on, there's unfortunately a tremendous potential for additional illness to be spread. We'll see if there's any impact on that. Right now, we have not yet seen it, but again, it's still too early to say. In some communities, there have been some cases that have reopened. In some of the Haimisha communities and some of the Frum communities, there have been a couple of cases, thank God, not too much, a very small amount, but that's something that we always have to be careful for. And I sent out to the Rabbanim of the shuls in the community, as well as to many doctors, a COVID tracker. Chemed, which is a wonderful health organization in Lakewood, developed this tracker. I'd been speaking with them to modify the tracker for our use. And I would ask that all the doctors in the community, please make sure that they have this tracker. I'm trying to reach out to them through Hatzalah, through other organizations, to make sure that any case that we have in our community is identified as early as possible and put into a central repository that nobody will have access to other than myself, and we'll get a handle on what is the true number of new cases in our community. Because if we wait till we get cases coming into the hospital, if we wait till we get cases that are brought in by the Department of Health, so then it may be a week or two behind the information that we would like to know right now. So again, I ask all physicians to please, it's a very simple tracker. It's a click on a computer to identify any new cases. If you do not have access to this as yet, please email me. I'll be very happy to send you the link. We're asking all the healthcare workers in the community that take care of people in our community to please fill this out if they get any new cases. We're not interested in old cases. We're interested in any new cases of COVID. This will allow us to be, Ezras Hashem, continue safely to open up. Before I get to talking about the Babis and Zaydis and the children and the mixing, I want to remind everybody that one of the most common questions I get is, when will this end? So the answer is, we don't know when it will end, but we're going to ease and gradually try to open up. And I'd like to say tonight that I feel comfortable at this point in time, based upon the Baruch Hashem, all the good news that we have, the diminished cases in the Frum communities that have opened up already, that have opened up before us, and Baruch Hashem in our community. So I think at this point it's appropriate for people who are willing to take the risk. It still is a slight risk. I don't want people to think that this is not a risk. But for people that are willing to take the risk, and they have to follow, if they want to follow my quote kula, they have to follow all of the rules of the kula. And that is, if they have no symptoms, any symptoms, 0 symptoms for the 2-week period of time, which could have started 2 weeks ago or a week ago, as I did mention to people to start thinking about this. And if they are maintaining absolute as possible social distancing and the wearing of the mask whenever they do go out, when they can't be socially distanced as much as ideally would be liked, and if one family has that true to it, no illness whatsoever, they could mix with another family that has that same criteria, that they have no illness for 2 weeks, no known exposures. A lot of times people ask me, well, I'm a healthcare worker. Do I have an exposure now? So we use these in the hospital. We follow the CDC definition of an exposure. Just because you're a doctor or a nurse taking care of a COVID patient, that doesn't mean you have an exposure. We have decent data to suggest that if you're wearing appropriate PPE, which includes in the hospital, people, they go into a COVID room, also a face shield. And if they're wearing appropriate masks and face shield, so then they don't have the status of being exposed. And whenever we have forms, for example, that ask, have you been exposed to COVID? So that from a technical point of view, the answer is no, you haven't. So when you have two families, two bubbles, if you wish, two pods that both have that same healthy status for the last 2 weeks with no known COVID exposures, and they wear masks when they go outside, I think it's acceptable for them if they want. If an older couple doesn't feel comfortable doing this, so their children shouldn't pester them to do it. You can still meet them far away at a distance in the street and see them. But if you want them to come into your house and you want to mingle and hug, so then I think it's a reasonable thing to do with one family, with one other family, not all the family at this point in time. I think we have to do it gradually. People have asked me, that means I have to choose which child I want to mix with. So I have a better answer for that. Since we don't know for certain what the value of antibodies are, but we do think that they might be valuable, I would think that the best mix possible would be at least if one of the couples or one of the units has in fact antibodies. Now that again means that they were a good test antibodies. They were a blood test and not one of the finger pricks. They were done by a reputable laboratory or a hospital. All the hospitals' tests are fine. And the major laboratories are also fine. They're highly specific tests. And if some people in the family have antibodies, that's probably a safer bubble to mix with. If two families have antibodies, that's certainly a safer bubble to mix. But it doesn't mean that you can just go mix any way you want. The CDC does not yet feel comfortable making the statement that those antibodies are definitely protective. My personal opinion is that I think that they will be good antibodies and they will be protective, but I'm not willing in a situation of potential pikuach nefashos to go against the other mumchas, which is the CDC, and say that we should ignore their opinion when we're dealing with pikuach nefashos. I think we can take the potential for antibody protection into account when we're going to mix anyway, because I would allow two people who didn't have antibodies to mix at this point in time if they have the safety factors that I mentioned, 2 weeks of no illness, and that they're wearing a mask whenever they go outside and come into close proximity with anybody else, whether it's shopping, whether it's going into a store. People are going to hopefully be going into stores and supporting businesses in a safe and appropriate way. And as we Be'ezus Hashem, if we hear that we're able to have larger minyanim, so more people will be able to attend, but at this point in time, the masks and the social distancing become more important than ever before if we want to continue to expand these bubbles. And maybe, Be'ezus Hashem, after a week or two, when nothing changes by some of the expansions, we can expand it to maybe another 2 or 3 families. And as we go into the summer, that's going to be even more important. Now, one of the questions that were asked often is, what about the kids? What about summer camps? What about the kids playing? If the kids are already playing with other kids, so then I think that's potentially a risk still of acquisition. We don't know enough about pediatric transmission, but if the children on the block or children with their friends are playing, so that is not something that I would say that family at this point should mix with older grandparents. So if you are interested in doing that, so it does mean a little bit of a sacrifice in terms of who the children are going to be playing with. Because if the children are mixing with 3 or 4 different sets of children, and there's that potential for transmission to the parents, so then that family doesn't have that 2 weeks of being socially distanced and healthy. So therefore, I think it is unfortunately going to be a little bit of a toss-up as to which one you want to do. And for some families, it may be more appropriate to mix with another family that has kids the same age and the kids can play with each other. And for others, it may be more appropriate to be with older couple or with the grandparents or with someone else like that you'd rather mix your bubble with. If you are going to send kids to camp, and one of the things that I don't know the answer to, but it looks like that the government will be allowing some forms of camps in New York and New Jersey. It's not clear yet. I've been asked by numerous camps and by many people what my thoughts are on this. And I have given my thoughts in a paper that has been submitted to the Department of Health in New York State, along with many other senior and expert infectious disease physicians across the country, what could be, key word there, what could be a safe way to open camps. That's been misinterpreted by some people as saying that camps can open. Until the Department of Health says that they can, they shouldn't. And it doesn't mean that our plan, which I think is a reasonable plan, will be accepted. Or it may be modified. It may be modified in a way that it may not be practical. And the same thing is with day camps. There are ways that you can make these camps safer. I don't think you can make them 100% safe. And the people that will send their children to them will have to make a decision. Now, it's very important to remember it's not a decision of life versus death, because children are going to be children. If they don't go to camp, they're going to be hanging out and mixing anyway. And it's going to be very difficult to keep bubbles in the summer. And as the kids get older, it's going to be dangerous. I think it's very important to realize that if we are not providing some sort of a kosher, safe environment for adolescents to be in, the potentials for trouble are pretty significant as well. We can't expect them to sit by the computers and just do Zoom games with their friends all summer. They're going to go outside. They're going to be mixing. And if we don't make sure that it's in a kosher and safe environment, the answer of not opening up some of these camps may be worse than the answer of opening them up. But there's still work that needs to be done. The Department of Health has to provide guidelines if and when both camps, day camps and sleepaway camps can open up. In some ways, sleepaway camps are actually easier because you can keep a cocoon of all the people in the camp and not allow anybody in or out for the entire program. No trips, just staying on campus. There are ways that it can be done pretty safely. Again, it needs to be decided by the departments of health whether that's an acceptable answer. This isn't Rabbi Glatt saying you should do this. This is sometimes smart people, not myself, other smart people, and my own opinion sometimes in terms of how it can be done as safely as possible. But there are experts at the Department of Health that will have to ultimately make those decisions before any camp can open up, before any camp, day camp or sleepaway camp can put out a safe way for our children. I think that there will always be potential transmission in these camps, no matter how safe you try to set it up. And obviously, the setup has to be in a very safe way, lechatchila, a priori, it has to be safe. And then, heaven forbid, if there is transmission, there has to be a mechanism in place to be able to detect it and to be able to prevent the spread. You can prevent spread of infection even in a camp. There's a beautiful paper that I put out in the Friday email that showed in a military base that they were able to stop cold the potential spread for infection, which would have been a tremendous number of people. We've seen this on some of the ships in the Navy, where they've been able to somewhat prevent once they realize that there's infection and potentially prevent it from spreading further. But it's critically important that the appropriate mechanisms in those camps be in place to be able to detect, screen, and isolate as appropriate. So I think we'll find out more about camps this week. I think with the phase 2 opening that the governor has talked about, which is already scheduled for Long Island this, I believe, Wednesday, and maybe that will be a time that we can also increase the minyanim. We're waiting to hear from the governor more about that. This is a very exciting time for us in Klal Yisrael. I want to mention a couple of things about masks. There is a mask out there that's a valve mask. I think this is actually a mask that should not be used. Somehow it became pretty popular. It looks a little bit like Darth Vader, and people like this type of a valve mask. What it unfortunately does is it allows the air that you're breathing to go outside. It may be good on a construction site. It may be good in other situations where the person wearing the mask is only wearing the mask to protect himself from other people. But here, part of the reason, maybe the major reason why we wear masks is to protect other people from us. So I would recommend that people not use those valve masks. In the hospital this week, I poskined that we cannot use them. We will not allow anybody in the hospital on our employed staff to use those valve masks because they protect what you're breathing in, but they actually allow you to exhale out like you weren't wearing a mask, and therefore those are potentially dangerous. So I would recommend that people not wear those valve masks. The last thing I wanted to say is that we should be very careful still. As I'm loosening up, I also want to do it. You push with the left hand and you bring back with the right hand. So you push away with the left hand. I want people to understand that as we're getting closer to each other, we decrease some of these bubbles. Please don't misunderstand that to mean that you can in any way relax on the appropriate things that we should be doing. I stress there are 3 things that we're doing that are important and that have made a huge impact on this. And that's not having large gatherings. Large gatherings, if people go to the summit, they're talking B'ezras Hashem about weddings and bar mitzvahs and makeups. These are potentially problematic if they're not going to be socially distanced and people wearing masks. And items that have food at them, it's almost impossible to wear a mask. And it's difficult if it's in some sort of a smorgasbord type of a style for people to socially distance. So as people think about barbecues and people think about food events with their families, they really need to limit the number of people at these, and they really need to separate the families unless they're in the same bubble. If they're in the same bubble, no problem. But if you're inviting people over and you're trying to have a socially distanced event, and if you can't wear a mask, you have to spread out even further. And I would just caution people as they're thinking about B'ezras Hashem making simchas in the summer, and as we may be allowed to have larger number of people, it doesn't mean that we go back automatically to the way that we made smachot in the recent past. So there'll be more guidelines about this. There'll be more information about this. B'ezras Hashem, we should be able to go back to make smachot, but we just probably will still have to do them in a different fashion in the near future. Reb Shmuel, if you're ready for any questions, I'll be happy to try to take them.
Okay. I was just asked before we begin with the questions, just to remind everyone about Rabbi Glatt's discussion before about the school election board. Everybody should try their best to vote. This is both for District 14 and District 15. We now have 1,000 people on the line, and we hope that we will have full participation. For anyone who needs to vote, there is an email address that you can send into, where they will pick up your ballot, that you don't have to mail it in. I think if you mail it in at this point, it is already too late. So if everybody can just remember to do that. Let me just, that's for District 15. Okay, anyone who needs the email address, please write in the chat and I will respond in a minute or so.
Okay, we have several questions. A lot of them came in early and you've already covered them, so I'm not going to ask the ones that you've covered. Somebody wrote in, there are 250 new cases in Eretz Yisrael, Rahman al-Islam. What does that mean for us as we open up? There are more cases in Florida, Texas, etc. What does the Rav think about that?
So this is what I alluded to earlier. There have been cases. It depends, obviously, on who has the cases, how they're identified, and is there a pattern. We don't expect there to be no cases. If there are cases, it's critically important that we identify them early. We have better screening now than we've had previously. There is a plethora of places where people can get tested. If you've been exposed to somebody, you should get tested for COVID. And you may need to get tested more than once, because if the first test is negative, it doesn't mean that you don't have it. And this contact tracing is critically important to identify asymptomatic with no symptoms spread. And the hope is that even if there are some cases, I know several cases of people in frum communities, not in ours, where new cases have been identified, but Baruch Hashem, there hasn't been spread in any significant number because of the reasons that people are wearing masks and are socially distancing. And once we identify somebody, in going to any of the minyanim, anybody going to a minyan, anybody going to a public area has to be willing to let everyone know he has COVID, she has COVID, if they Rahman al-Islam get it, and that everybody that they've been in contact with needs to be informed. It's not a stigma. It's not you're a terrible person. If you were asymptomatic, how are you supposed to know? Chas v'shalom, nobody should be going to any place if they have any symptoms. Any symptoms means you stay home. The CDC finally came out, I think on Thursday, stating that GI symptoms nausea, vomiting, diarrhea are symptoms of COVID. We've been saying that for months now. It's critically important that people understand any symptoms means stay at home. Don't play games. We've mentioned this in the past. Somebody who has a chiyuv to daven thinks he has to go to daven. You don't. You have an issa to go to a minyan if you have symptoms, not a chiyuv. So I can't stress enough. There are new cases in Eretz Yisrael, which is scary. There are cases in some of the frum communities that have opened up. Baruch Hashem, let's hope that with the better technology that we have in identifying cases of COVID, screening, and contact tracing, that we can nip these in the bud. But that's why the COVID tracker that I sent out, and I really hope that every physician, every Hatzalah member fills that out if they know of a single case. Because it's one case, everybody says not a big deal. But if we have several cases, or even one case, we can watch, are there any other cases in that shul, in that community? So please, I ask every physician, if you don't have it, email me and I'll send you the link. Any healthcare worker who's finding and identifying any new, I'm only interested in new COVID cases, please fill out the tracker. It takes about 30 seconds to fill it out, and the information will be useful for every single person in our community.
Okay, I'm going to ask you two questions that's sort of related. One is, at what point is it safe to bring a babysitter into the house of a family in which the parents had the virus and have strong antibodies? And what about individuals that aren't in shuls that have now opened for minyanim inside, however, with only 11 people socially distanced with masks? Would it be okay for that person to come home and then go greet his grandparents?
Okay, so let me ask the first question first. About people coming into the house, a babysitter, a housekeeper, other people doing repair work. These are very common questions that I get. My answer is, it depends. If they're without symptoms and they've been that way for 2 weeks and they are socially distancing and wearing a mask, and they're going to wear a mask when they're in your house, if they're coming in for a one-time basis, then I think it's safe. That doesn't address the babysitter, that addresses all the other situations. So if you have a cleaning person coming into your house, they're healthy, they don't have any symptoms, and they're following the guidelines as best as you can tell. You don't know necessarily for sure. And they wear a mask in your house, and you try not to be within 6-8 feet of them for any significant period of time, I think that that is safe. Certainly if they're coughing, if they have any symptoms, they should be sent home immediately. Similar to any repair person that comes into your house doing, people ask me about air conditioner repairs or appliance repairs, electrical work. I think it's perfectly safe to do so with the guidelines that I just said. For somebody coming into your house on a daily basis, on a regular basis, so then every time they come in, especially if they're taking care of your children, you can't expect them to wear a mask all the time that they're in the house. I think that is a higher risk, but it's still a risk that can be managed. It needs to be individualized. Again, here is where I would take the fact that somebody has antibodies and use that as a tziruf, as an additional factor in making a decision, because it may be a critical, important, and helpful factor that you have antibodies, that you're not at risk for getting something from them, even though it's not definitive. But if people have to go to work, Baruch Hashem, your business is now able to open and you can go back to work, and you need somebody to do childcare or stay at home with your younger babies or older children. So then a housekeeper can be an appropriate person to enter your house. If they have antibodies, that would be helpful as well. Again, it doesn't mean that you're Superman, but it's a piece of information that I would use in a positive way. But they need to be asymptomatic. I would not let them in if they had any symptoms in the last 2 weeks. So I think it's critically important that those things still be maintained. It is a risk. And I can't tell people it's okay to do something risky. I can just say it's a low risk and it's a personal choice then if you wish to take it. In this situation, if it's a risk and now you want to go visit your parents, it's a second risk. If the original person hasn't had symptoms, it's still possible that they could transmit to you without symptoms. And it's possible that you could have the virus without symptoms, and then you could transmit it to your older parents. It's unlikely, but I can't say that it's zero risk. Again, if people have antibodies, that definitely makes it much, much less likely. but not enough to say absolutely. But again, if we're starting to begin to open the door a crack, I think those are reasonable risks for people who wish to take them to take them. I don't think that they're being unresponsible. I don't think that they're being carefree and putting society at risk. But it is still a risk at this point in time when you have somebody coming in and then going home. If they're living with you, that's actually safer. If you have a live-in housekeeper, a live-in childcare person, that's actually safer. It's like the sleepaway camps. If everybody's in the same bubble, it's a little bit less of a risk once you get beyond that first 2-week period, and once you get beyond the point that their prior activities, are no longer considered important in terms of current risk. We'll take one or two questions.
People want to know, in view of that, we may be going back to work. What does the Rav Doctor think about Long Island Railroad and this subway system in New York City?
So I think that the actual contact with anything on the subways, I don't think is a concern. I think they are cleaning them. I don't think that that's a highly important way to transmit virus from the actual physical surfaces. And I would suggest when you leave the subway, leave the LIRR, wash your hands, carry a little Purell with you, wash your hands as soon as you leave, and anything you touch, try not to touch your face, your eyes, your nose. When you're on the subway, as possible. People don't realize how many times they touch their faces. If you're wearing a mask, as you obviously should, it's a little bit harder to touch your face and your nose. You still can rub your eyes. You should be careful about that because virus can be transmitted in any of those ways. But that's unlikely from the surfaces. The concern will be all the other people that are on that subway at that time. If it's a typical subway rush hour like it was, where people are standing next to each other like sardines, and it's impossible to socially distance, so I can say that that's not a risk. Baruch Hashem, if there's a lot less COVID in our neighborhoods, it's a very much diminished risk compared to what it was around Pesach time. But I can't say that it's not a risk. And people have to make a decision. Are they willing to take that risk, or is there another means of transportation they can get in? Can they go in on a later train, which may not be so crowded? Is there an opportunity? Will the LIRR, will the subways mandate some sort of social distancing? For going on one of these trains for a 45-minute period of time, when you're 6 feet away from all the other passengers, I think is not unreasonable. And if somebody has antibodies, that's a tziruf, another additional thing that you can add in to say that it's probably not a high-risk activity. But again, it's the type of thing that each person is going to have to decide, am I willing or able to take such a risk because of my family situation, your own personal situation? Maybe that will change what you do in terms of mixing with other people, as people need to go back for parnasa. So for parnasa, you're allowed to take risks, but that doesn't mean that your parents or your friends also have to take that risk. So I think that each case should be individualized. If you can socially distance, wear a mask, wash your hands right afterwards, I don't think it's unreasonable. If the train is very crowded, it becomes a little bit more unreasonable.
Okay. Question that seems to be on everybody's mind is if somebody is tested positive, that he has the antibodies, is he or she contagious to give it to another person? Or once you have the antibodies, are you in the clear?
So as far as we know, there is no case where anybody had COVID and then got COVID again. Zero. Not one case in the millions of cases across the world. To me, that's a very strong proof that it is unlikely that somebody's going to transmit virus right now. But we don't know what happens 3 months after they had COVID because we don't have that much of experience. So the first cases were in late December. We're starting to get cases now almost 6 months. And as we get more and more information that, thank God, b'li ayin hara, no new COVID cases have been identified in anybody who had COVID. And we do know that almost all people develop antibodies after they did get COVID, even though we can't always detect it. But if you do enough fancy tests, you can demonstrate that essentially everybody who had COVID has antibodies. So therefore, I do think that that will become important and be a way that we can more safely open up society, but not enough right now today, based upon the CDC not willing to say that. So I have to defer to their opinion as well at this point in time and say that it's a tziruf. I will use that information to help me make a decision on an individual, but I won't make a blanket statement at this point in time for a community that if you have antibodies, go do whatever you want. I think that would be irresponsible and dangerous at this point in time. Maybe, B'ezras Hashem, in a future point in time, we'll say that that's actually a right thing to do, but we don't know. And nobody should act on that right now as a community. On an individual basis, it may be reasonable to act upon it. We'll take one more question.
Okay, last question. What about individuals that are entering shuls that have now opened for minyanim inside, however, with only 11 people, socially distanced with masks? Would it be okay for that person to come home and then go greet his grandparents? I think the assumption is that the person has not tested positive for antibodies.
Okay, so I think people who go to a shul and do it properly, the minyanim that I was at, we were properly. One person at one point, I don't want to mention names, Chas v'shalom, he took off his mask a little bit. I stopped the davening and said, you got to put your mask back on. It's uncomfortable. I lay in today with a mask on. It was not comfortable, but it's important to do it. And if you can't do it, then don't come to the minyan. It's as simple as that. So if people, like in the hospital, who are, quote, exposed, but not really exposed because they're wearing appropriate equipment, they're wearing protective equipment. So if you go to a minyan and you're socially distanced and you're wearing a mask the whole time, I don't consider you exposed. Even if somebody at the minyan actually had COVID, I don't think you've been exposed. And therefore, if you were getting together with other people, legitimately and properly, going to the minyan doesn't change that. I don't think so.
Okay. So I just want to thank everybody for joining, and I'd like to thank the people that contributed to the shul. We do a lot of work in order to make these Zoom conferences available and to provide for the entire community. Obviously, Rabbi Glatt spends a lot of time doing this, and he's very, very busy with his shul duties and his hospital duties, so we appreciate everything that he's done. And anybody that wants to contribute to the shul, you can go on the website and hit the donate button. We would appreciate it as well, and thank you all for joining. I think Rabbi Glatt or Rabbi Schechter has one more announcement about the school district voting. Am I right? Rabbi Schechter, Rabbi Glatt?
Well, just remind everybody again, please, District 14 and District 15.
Just to remember the drop-off place. You can drop off your ballot at Lawrence High School. It's very important. Get